Well, good day everyone and welcome to our session today. Today we're focusing on the testing chapter. The testing chapter is actually chapter 8 of the 10 chapters. So we're very much nearing the end of the project with just 2 more chapters to go, which is after testing, we have evaluation and then we have conclusion. So we're very near the end, guys. All right. Hope you guys have been coming along well with your writing. I know it's not the favorite part of the project, but definitely it's a crucial aspect of the project to get the chapters done. The good thing for you guys as well is that the testing, evaluation, and conclusion chapter are the 3 shortest chapters of your write-up. So today's class is not going to be a very lengthy class, right? And as we get through with this, okay? All right. Any questions so far, guys? All right, so what we're going to do, before we get started with today's project, we're going to just briefly introduce our word for today. And our word for today is, I'm not a product of my circumstances. I am the product of my decisions. A lot of us actually blame others for everything that we go through. You know, we blame others for the things that they have done, etc. The truth is, we're not responsible for other people's decision, other people's action. Certainly people could do stuff that, you know, we become angry, etc. But we are not, you know, that's not we are not in control of their choices, etc. What we are control of is decisions we make, and the decisions we make really determine, you know, who we are. So I want to encourage you guys today to stop the blame game, stop blaming others for everything that is happening to us, you know. And the reality is that to take responsibility for our actions, our decisions, etc. No one owes us our happiness. Our happiness is our choice. You know, every day we have to make that decision. You know, our mindset really can determine if we have a productive day, a happy day, etc., or even if we make it a happy day for others as well. So I want to encourage you guys to have a very healthy mindset and recognize that you are the product of your decisions, not the product of your circumstances. So as we're moving now, we're looking at chapter 8, which is our testing chapter. Before we get into the testing chapter as well, can you tell me why the testing of the application is important? If you guys could share from your perspective why you need to test the application. Any particular reason?
Basically, to ensure that all the requirements that you're trying to implement is working properly and how it's supposed to.
Very good, you know. So you're just checking to ensure it works the way it is intended to, and that is exactly what testing is for, right? Could you tell me some of the challenges you might have if you don't properly test the application and you go about implementing it? What are some of the potential problems you could have?
If you do test it and you use it and errors occur, you would know how to handle it.
No problem. Good. And if you don't properly test the application and you go ahead and you have given this now to people to use, the challenge is it may have lots of bugs and errors, etc., because you didn't do testing on it and you wouldn't have recognized those, right? Now, that would be considered an LSCP issue. One of the things about LSCP is, as a professional, you are expected to act as a professional. Remember, in LSCP, the P stands for professional, right? So as a professional, you are expected to follow certain quality controls and measures, etc., and develop, you know, your own code of ethics as well in developing the application. Therefore, for example, when you buy a product, right? Let's say for example, you buy a chair. You would have assumed that they would have done testing on the chair and it would have passed the relevant standards, etc. So that when you use it, you know, you are using something that is well tested and, you know, it wouldn't fall apart after one use, etc. Right? And the same thing with your application. If you properly test your application, then ideally when you deliver it to the people, there should not be bugs and a whole set of defects with it as well that you are going to give to persons to use, right? So testing is crucial in order to recognize the bugs and also to give you another opportunity in order to fix them as well. Good? All right. So given the fact that in testing, you need to test the application and it also gives you a chance to fix whatever problems, let's think of what are some of the things we're going to cover in today's chapter as well. So first of all, in terms of the chapter, this chapter will discuss your strategy for testing the software. And of course, you need to report the outcomes. The strategy means you must have a plan for testing. You're not just random going to ad hoc test here and there, etc. It cannot be just a scattered approach to testing. It must be a well thought out, structured approach to testing your application. And of course, when you test it, the results of your testing need to be stored somewhere, right? So when you test, the outcomes means the outcome is the results of your testing. So you need to also store that. Do you think you need to provide evidence where your test is successful? You think evidence should be provided in instances to show your test was successful?
Yes, they should.
Why is that?
So you'll have evidence, they'll see that you actually did it.
Correct, because you could claim everything working and provide no evidence, right? And therefore, the evidence is to support, so the university can see that, yes, you are not just making a claim, but you're supporting it with evidence that it is working. So evidence is crucial. Now, as part of your testing, let's look at the plan of our approach for testing. And you could tell me, you know, we discussed at a high level. It's more important that you understand the approach and the structure so that when you're writing it, you could understand why each part flows into the other part, right? So every chapter we said has an introduction, which will discuss the role of this chapter, why this chapter is important, what will be covered in this chapter, etc. Now, to do your testing, in order to have a structured approach to testing rather than a random ad hoc approach, the best way to have a structured approach is by having any suggestion? 8.2 is a hint. A test plan. Correct. So you'll have a test plan. Now let's think, if it is you want a structured approach to testing, what you think a test plan might be? Any idea what you think a test plan might involve?
Different functionalities that you want to see if they're working. So you write down different functionalities. You don't have to test everything. So maybe the most basic features of the functions of the website, you could write it down and then test each phase and take screenshots as evidence.
Not a problem. So I want to challenge you here now, Camille, and I want maybe anyone else to add as well. Now, Camille suggested, well, you may not, now the truth is you may not have time to test everything, but you're not going to tell the university that. The question is, should you test everything? Is the intention to test everything? What do you guys think? Anyone?
Well, I just thinking out loud here, right?
Yeah.
The test plan should have something like expected results. So even if you do test it, at least you would show the university, well, if you did test it, it should have this type of result. Or if it doesn't, well, it would be an error, you know, that kind of thing.
But the question is, should you try to test everything?
Yeah, definitely.
Correct. Once you're going to launch a product, you should be testing that inside out, because the fact is you want to make sure there are no bugs. And the only way you could verify there are no bugs is this, if you test everything, right? So the reality is that your approach should be to test everything rather than just avoid testing certain things. Now, the other thing is that in terms of your testing, right, your testing should be structured. So how could you have a structured test plan? Well, as Camille had alluded to, you are testing the functional requirements. So what we're going to do, we are going to take the functional requirements from the requirements analysis chapter. Remember, in the requirements analysis, you would have identified like FR1, FR2, FR3, functional requirement 1, functional requirement 2, 3, etc. You guys recall those? Fail list of requirements. You would have done those in your IPR, and you would have expanded on it a bit in that chapter, the functional requirements chapter. So the approach to this is you take each of those functional requirements, and for each one of those, you develop a series of tests, right? Could one test check everything? And the answer is no. A test might be just to check a particular subset of a particular function, right? So you may have to do multiple tests in order to test a particular function. I'll give you an example. For the registration page, if a person is registering, right? What are some of the things you might want to test on the registration page? Think of registering on a website, right? In order to register, you have to enter a username or email address, and a password, and probably to confirm the password, right? Those are just maybe just a couple. Just using those fields alone, tell me a test you could check to make sure it's working.
You could put like some a required function to make sure you enter a valid email and stuff.
Right, but a test would be to ensure that the email address does not already exist, right? You cannot register twice. Remember, this is your registration page, right? So you want to make sure that that email address does not already exist, or the username does not already exist. That's one test. So that's one separate test, but it's unique. It just tests a small feature of the registration. Could you suggest another test? Remember the fields you have. You have username, which is email address. You have password, and you have the confirm password. Can you tell me anything else that you could test for as well?
You could check to see if the two passwords that were entered, if they match.
Excellent. So therefore, the password and confirm passwords, another test would be to check to see that they match. Remember, you are the creator of the system. You should know the system better than the users, and you have to capture all the different things that the user could possibly do. That's the intent of a very good structured approach to testing, right? So that at the end of it is to minimize bugs. So these are just some of the things you will include in your test plan. So when you're doing your test plan, before you actually do your test plan is structured. For every functionality, you have a list of tests. So you're not just randomly, let me do this, choose this functionality, do this, let me choose this other functionality. No, every single functionality should have a series of tests associated with it, right? And that is what your test plan is. Your test plan is to ensure that everything gets tested. Then after that, now, the testing of the functional, non-functional is where you actually conduct the test. And when you conduct the test now, you will indicate like what work, etc. So the testing of the functional requirements basically is to show what work or did not work. So you will record the outcome of the test. And then, so you test your functional, you test your non-functional, you record your outcomes. Now, what is the defects log about? Is it expected that everything will work well? Would you assume everything will work well, or do you anticipate there'll be some problems or some bugs in it?
There might be bugs.
Right. Now, if there are bugs, what do you do with the bugs? Do you just leave them on the system and say, well, whoever going to use it, they have to live with that? What do you do with the bugs?
You log them and try to fix them.
Correct. So you log them and you try to fix them. Now, in order to log the bugs, you need somewhere to log it. Look at 8.5. Where do you log the bugs? In a defects log. If just the name defects log, defects suggest that they are defects, they are bugs. A bug is a defect, right? So the defects log is simply a file you use to log all the bugs. And the reason you need to log it is because all the problems are listed there. So you have a list of the problems, and now you go and you try to fix them, right? And then at the end now, after you try to fix, it's possible you may not get to fix all of them because of time or whatever. And then you conclude now with an analysis of the result. And the analysis of the result will simply tell you, well, look, I did like 30 tests, 20 were successful, 10 failed, but of that 10 failed, I put them in the defects log, and of that 10, I was able to fix 6 of them, and 4 I didn't get to fix, sort of thing, right? So that's what the analysis of results is about. So this basically is an overview of the testing chapter and what is included. Are you seeing?
Ravi,
Yeah.
So the defects log is like an ongoing document throughout testing.
Yep, correct. As you test and you have a problem, you record it in the defects log.
It is not at the end of testing, at the end of the project, you don't have to produce a document like a defects log that will show you the remaining defects that weren't resolved.
Not necessarily, because it's two parts, right? Ideally, when you are developing the system, you are testing as you go along. Agreed?
Yeah.
Right. But at the end, when you complete the entire system now, you want to do a complete test, because your complete test will also be, for example, when you do one thing in one screen, it may impact another screen later on. right? So for example, when I purchase, let's say if I had an e-commerce system, right? If I purchased an item, right? In another screen where the item is, the count for that item should be reduced by how much I purchase, right? So,
Yes.
so the actions in one screen could impact another screen. So you may not be able to verify that in the first test when you're developing, right? So now that you've completed the system, you could do an overall testing of the system now. And this is where, so this testing now is really a more overall testing of the entire system now that you finish it. And you can, so initially when you're building, yes, you will be testing, but you're not using the defects log at that point there. Is when the whole thing is completed now you can really do your full proper set of testing and you check your defects, etc. Right?
Understood.
But while you are building, you are expected to have bugs as you go along, but it's a natural process. But at the end of building, you are expected to have fixed those things. So now when you do a proper test, this proper test should only reflect a minimal amount of bugs, because you would have sorted those out when you were naturally building, and you know it was a continuous process of building, right? Okay, so this is your overview. Now, one of the advantage of this test, of this chapter, is the next chapter, which is evaluation, is done very much the same way. The testing is linked to your functional requirements. To me, functional requirements and testing are the two linked together, because every one of your functional requirements will be listed here. This is what you're going to test, right? And similarly, when you're doing your evaluation chapter, you are evaluating your user you are evaluating now the Nielsen heuristics that we would have discussed in the design chapter, which was last week we did that. So those two chapters are linked together. But the structure of the testing and evaluation chapter is pretty much the same. Both of them are basically doing a series of tests, right? To check for things working or not, right? Or the existence of stuff. So that's the approach. So what we're going to do now, get into each one of the different parts, right? As usual, the introduction, always, as I've indicated before, for the introduction, there are two things. For the introduction, discuss the importance of this chapter, of testing, sorry. What is the importance of testing? Why is testing so important? And all you have to do is do a Google search and look at what the different people say why testing is so important, and you could paraphrase what you've gotten, right? And then what will be covered in this chapter? And what will be covered in this chapter was simply the previous slide. So in the previous slide, right, this is what will be covered. You will look at a detailed test plan, including functional and non-functional testing, along with a defects log to record any defects, right? So that's basically what is covered. So let's take an example of how you could write this introduction. So an example of introduction would be, right, the purpose of testing is to make certain that the implemented system is working correctly and efficiently. Testing can give confidence in the quality of the software if it finds few or no defects. A properly designed test that passes reduces the overall level of risk in a system. When testing does find defects, the quality of the software system increases when those defects are fixed. So basically, I've discussed in the first paragraph there the importance of testing. The next paragraph discusses what will be covered in this chapter. So it summarizes the table of content for this chapter. So it says this chapter covers the testing of the functional and non-functional requirements of the system. A test plan was used to indicate each test being done, including data to be used where possible. The results were recorded in a test document. Defects found were recorded in a defects log, which were used as the source for bug fixes at the end of testing, right? And that's your introduction there. And every chapter has a similar introduction outlining why this aspect, or like if this testing, why is testing important, and what will be covered in the chapter. Good? Okay, so now next we look at the test plan. Now, in terms of your test plan, we had a discussion at the start, what should be in your test plan. And we indicated that, look, your test plan should show a structured approach to testing. It has to follow a logical process. It is not random. It is not ad hoc. So therefore, in order to show up a structured approach to testing, right, what you would probably do, right, you would use your list of requirements, and for each of those requirements, you will conduct testing on it. However, in terms of tests, if you read up a bit on testing, you will see that there are different types of tests. There are black box testing. What black box testing is? Black box testing basically is you're not concerned of internally how the program works. You're only concerned that whatever you input, you get the desired output. So for example, if I use the registration page, the purpose of the registration page is to register a user. So what black box testing simply does is to check if the registration page allows us, can you successfully register using the registration page? That's black box testing. So black box testing is not concerned of any form of validation and stuff that's happening inside. It ignores and hides the detail of what is happening inside of the function. And all it concerns is that the function basically gives you the end result, which is, so if it's to register, the registration page at the end should allow you to register. What do you think black box testing for the login should do? Black box testing for login is simply to ensure that you can, come on guys, if I'm doing black box testing of the login screen, what is the purpose of the login screen?
Okay.
To log in.
So you could log in.
Good. So therefore, if I'm doing black box testing of the login screen, it's simply to ensure I could log in, right? Okay. If I do black box testing for a test, all I want to do is the person could take the test and get their results at the end, right? So that's what black box testing is. So that's one approach to testing, but you cannot just use black box alone. You need also to consider white box. What white box is? White box is where you could actually see the internals of the system. So you're seeing inside of it, and now you should be able to figure out all the intimate details within it. So for example, within the registration page now, white box testing will check to see if there's field level validation, you're validating fields, etc. Right? You're making sure what is mandatory fields are checked and all of those, right? So an example of white box testing for the registration page is to ensure, for example, that the username is unique, that somebody didn't already register with that username, or to ensure that the password and confirm passwords match. Good? Now, tell me something in terms of the login now. If you were doing white box testing for login, white box testing will check for errors and those things, right? So can you tell me if you're doing white box testing for your login, for the login function, what would you test for those?
That the person is a valid user.
That when the username they enter actually exists, or the username and password combination matches an existing username password, right? So if the username is or password is invalid, you will flag them accordingly. Good? All right. So those are examples of what white box testing does. It checks the inside, and therefore every bit of the function now it checks to ensure that they are working properly, right? Okay. Now, of course, in your write-up to testing, so when you are discussing your test plan, you have to justify your test plan. You just cannot merely say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do black box or white box testing. You have to justify the approach that you're using, because with the university, they don't just want to know what you're doing, they want to know why you're doing it. And that's what makes a write-up good. It's always about justifying. Apart from that as well, when you are testing your data, you don't just test your data using regular data. You should test your data using extreme data as well. So for example, extreme data will check like the field lengths and all of those. So if that's the case, if I'm entering my password, right, regular data will be just an average password, but extreme data will check to see if it does, if it checks to ensure that you have like all the different characters and stuff like that. You know, that's what extreme is, right? And even where possible, you will use invalid data. So for example, if you're testing the registration page, you should also try to test it using deliberately entering invalid data. Why should you try to enter invalid data? What's the reason why you want to test it by deliberately putting in invalid data?
To ensure the functionality working as it should.
Correct, because let's take the registration page. If you didn't check to verify that email address already exists, then what you would have now is a problem with two users with the same username, which should not happen at all, right? Okay. Or the password and the confirmed password don't match, but you never bother to check it. So when if the person they entered an incorrect meaning, like they, in their mind, the value they wanted to put for the password was, let's say hello, but the password they type in was different. And when they type it again, they typed it incorrectly. In their mind, the correct password is hello. So when they go to log in now, you know, because you didn't do a verification, the password is not hello, it's some other word that they would have typed in, but they weren't paying attention. So those are some of the things that's why you need to test deliberately with invalid data to see if how your system handles error messages and all of those things, right? Because you remember, your users will make mistakes. And because they make mistakes, you have to develop the system so that it is child-proof, if you want to call it that it will cater for those mistakes, right? So an example of your test plan in terms of what you write could be, the test strategy involves the formulation of a series of tests to be conducted on the application. The application will be will be tested using functional requirements as well as non-functional requirements. The functional requirements will be tested using a combination of unit tests and integration tests. Unit tests will validate the smallest component of the system, ensuring they handle known inputs and outputs correctly using different data such as expected data, boundary data, and negative cases. Integration tests exercise an entire subsystem and ensure that the test of components play nicely together, right? Each test will include test data, the expected outcome, and the actual outcome, along with the results. So what they're saying here now is every time you do a test, you will record the expected out, you will include test data. So you are telling the person who's testing what data to test with. You have expected outcome, actual outcome, along with the result, whether it was successful or failed. Evidence will be provided for all tests. We talked about the importance of evidence at the start of the class, right? To show the need for evidence. A failed test represents a defect and will be logged in the defects log. At the end of testing, attempts will be made to fix all items in the defects log. So you discuss your plan with them. You tell them how you're going about doing the testing and the different types of tests you will use as well. Next, you're going to test your functional requirements. So we're going to have testing of functional as well as testing of non-functional, right? In terms of the testing of the functional, right, then this is what some of the things you will have, right? So when testing, these are some things to consider. Ensure that the requirement is met, which is the black box testing. So for example, if it's the registration page, the user should be able to register. If it's the login page, the user should be able to log in. So you want to ensure that the requirement is met. So that's your black box testing. Then you do your white box testing, which is to include any validation. So for example, are you validating to ensure the username is unique, right? Are you checking for security features? For example, the password should be displayed in secure text, meaning, when somebody's entering the password, you should not be able to see the password. Instead, you might see a series of asterisks or dots or something like that. You should do tests to ensure the relevant fields are defaulted. For example, some fields the user don't need to enter, it can default. Like when you're creating a user, the date created should be defaulted to today's date. The user type might be defaulted as well. So you want to test all of those things are happening in the background, because a user should not have to put in their user type. The system will default user type for the user. You might do tests to ensure that if there's any calculation, right, and there's a calculated field, then that calculation is correct. You want to test that the links are also working properly on the site. So for example, if you go to the registration page, at the bottom you might have a small, what are some of the links you'll have in the registration page? Because sometimes a person may go in that page in error. What are some of the links you normally find in a registration page? Anyone? On the registration page, what are some of the links you might probably find?
Links are into other pages.
Well, right, but give me an example.
Like login.
Right, because a person may go to the registration page, but they don't need to register. They already have an account, right? So if you go to the registration page, at the bottom of the registration page might say, already have an account, right? Log in here or something like that, right? So that's an example of a link. Every link, every hyperlink you have, you need to test it as well to ensure that it is working, right? And also, you have to test security. You want to ensure that only the relevant users have access to a feature. So for example, eventually, if John Doe is logged in, John Doe should only be able to see John Doe's data, not anybody else's data. And if Mary Jane logs in, Mary Jane should not be able to see John Doe's data, but only see her data, right? So all of those things. So these are ideas to guide you when you are doing your testing. Some of you will skip past this and just read through it quickly and don't understand the relevance or significance of each one. The testing is not a fixed thing, meaning that this, I could guide you in terms of what you need to consider. So this here is like a guidance, set of points, and you have to figure out which ones you have in your screen and therefore which one you need to test. All right. So let's look at an example. If you're doing user registration, what are some of the things you might therefore test in user registration? Well, you might want to test that a new user should be able to register by providing their username and password, right? Which is your black box. White box says you should ensure the username is unique. You should ensure the password is not displayed in plain text, but in secure text. You should ensure that there's a link to the registration page from the login page, right? You should ensure that there's a link to the registration page from any public page. So once you're not logged in, you should be able to view a link to register as well. Only unregistered users should have access to this feature. Meaning that if you are logged into the system now, so when you log in, should you have the option to register after you've already logged in?
No.
No, you should not. You
should be able to register more than once.
Right. But apart from that too, meaning that only when you're not logged in and you're on the public page without logging in, you should be able to see the option to register, right? Okay, but once you are logged in, you're not going to see the register option because you already logged in. Why would you need to register if you have already logged in, right? Okay, and of course, other things to check password and confirm password match. Could you tell me other things you might have in your user registration page? Anything comes to mind? Strong passwords, hint?
Terms and agreement.
Okay, so you can have a terms of agreement as well. So what you could do, in order to register, they must tick the button that they accept the terms and conditions or whatever, right? It could be a privacy policy as well, which is one of the things you may have discussed in your LSC PSU. So you have a privacy policy where they must agree that, look, when you register, I will be using your data to send you messages wherever. You could always opt out of, etc. So that's like a privacy option you could have. Anybody else? Any other thing you might want to test in your registration page?
Security questions.
Like, okay, so good. So you may want, so if you include your security questions when you're registering, then you may want to test those. Or even the strength of the password, like if you're using complex password, right? All of those you should be testing in there, right? Let's look at another one. If you had a shopping cart, this is for e-commerce. If you're doing shopping cart implementation, the customer should be able to add items to the cart by clicking the cart, the add to cart. The items added to the cart can be viewed from the My Cart tab. The customer should be able to remove item from the cart by clicking the remove button. The customer should be able to check out the cart. The customer should be able to enter delivery address or choose the delivery address from a list of address, etc. So those are some options, right? So just some further notes on testing as well. Ensure that your tests are comprehensive and they cover the entire application. Don't test just a subset, test the entire system. Now, what if you had titty requirements, right? But you only develop 10. Should you only write the test for 10 of them, or should you write the test for all 30 of them?
All 30.
Correct. And you should develop your test for all 30. The reason is that you want, remember, they are marking you not on your artifact, but they're marking you on how comprehensive your tests are. So your application could be a total failure, but you could have a fantastic testing chapter, even though nothing worked, because you are not getting more marks because things work, you are getting more marks for the quality of your documenting the process, right? Okay, and providing the evidence, etc. That is where your marks are from. They are not going to penalize you twice for the same thing. So if you're going to be penalized in the application part for having a poor application, they're not going to penalize you again in this section here. This section here, you're going to be marked to determine how well you write the chapter. Not how well your application works, but how well you write the chapter to discuss the detail level of testing. As I said, everything could fail, but the fact is that your tests were comprehensive, they were very detailed, you used proper method, you justified the approaches, etc. Good. So ensure your tests are comprehensive and cover the entire application. Ensure that any small intricacies are known and displayed in your testing. Use your test to display or reiterate some of the integrity checks in your system. Use your test to market your application to show off what it can do. Remember, they are using your FPR to gain an insight into what your application can do. So as much as possible, show off your system if you can. So an example of writing the testing of the functional requirements, you may have, each functional requirement will be tested or was tested using a combination of expected data, extreme data, and negative test data. The test checks to ensure the functional requirement does what it's supposed to do. It also checks fee level validation, context sensitive information, defaulting of data, appropriateness of error message, ensure the hyperlinks to access the features are working well as hyperlinks at the end of the feature, right? Table 20 shows testing of functional requirements. FR1, create an account. Appendix 12 see Appendix 12 for a full list of the functional testing, right? So this is an example of a test. So in your document, you should put an example of a detailed test. So of course, develop one really, really good. And this is the one you're putting in the body. Remember, this testing is very detailed, so it will go in the appendix, but you want to provide evidence in the write-up. So you document the best, the one you documented best, you put it in the body of the write-up, right? So notice this example. Notice it's clear at the top which functional requirement I'm testing. I'm testing FR1, create an account. So it's clear the functional requirement. Look at the numbering of the tests. Within FR1, all the tests will be FR1.1, FR1.2, FR1.3, FR1.4, etc. So every test has a clear number to identify it. And the reason for that is any defects have to go in the defects log. So you need to put the test number, right? Now, next, notice as well, apart from a test number, I have the data that I'm going to use. So you're specifying the data to use. I put the expected outcome, and I'm logging the actual outcome when I test it. And then I also have the results of the test, whether it was successful or not. So in this first one, right, this is create an account, which is registered user. The customer's name is John Doe. Email address is johndoe@hotmail.com. The password is #blessed1, right? Notice the password has a combination of uppercase, lowercase, number, etc. Right? The expected outcome is that the customer should be registered, and after the register, taken to the login page, and a record is added to the customer or for the customer in the users table. This is what you expect to happen. Then you record the actual outcome when you did the test. The actual outcome is that the customer was registered and taken to the login page, record was added, and you send them to Appendix 12.1 for evidence. Notice evidence is provided. This test is a success, so you put the result there. Test 2, I'm registering another customer, Marvin Jones, with email address johndoe@hotmail.com. If I register another person with the same email address, should it allow it? In FR2, what do you think I'm trying to do here? What is the purpose of FR2?
To see if we could register another user with the same email address.
Right, and it should not happen, right? So notice the expected outcome is a message indicating that the email address already exists, registration not allowed. What happens now? The actual outcome is a message indicating email address already exists, registration not allowed, C12.2 for evidence. Good, this test was a success. The next one now, which is the third one, you register another customer, Jane Child, with email address here and a simple password, right? According to this, a message indicating that the password is not a strong password and a request to enter a new password, an error message indicating that a strong password is required, right? So this is what you expect because you are talking about strong password. But when you tested it, you realize that it allows the customer to register, right? And you provide evidence. So in that case, the person was allowed to register. That is a failed test because you didn't want them to register because they're using a weak password. So what does this mean? It means that your strong password is not working properly. This was our failed test. And where will you have to log this test? This will be logged in the defects log. So notice when we go to the defects log, you'll see FR1.3. It was a failed test, right? Etc. So notice every one of your tests you document in detail, right? And so this is a continuation. All of this is create an account. Look, I developed this one in detail for you as well. okay? So you're testing the links and all of those. So I'm trying to show you a detail level of testing just one functionality. So just to test this one functionality, I had like eight tests for that one functionality. This is another functionality, login. For the login, I have three tests here. One is to ensure that you could log in with the correct username and password, right? The customer logged in. So according to this, when you log in, the customer should be logged in and a message login as John Doe should be displayed on the homepage. You know, some website tell you who you're logging as. Well, according to the actual outcome, the customer is logged in, but the message login John Doe is not shown on the homepage. So that is a partial success. So you need to record this in the defects log in order to fix it. It's not a full fail, it's a partial, right? The other one is you log in at John Doe, but with the wrong password, it does not allow you to log in. So that's a success, etc. Right? So, and so you go for each test, you do them. And so every one of your functional requirements, you have to develop this level of detailed testing. All right, it is going to take a bit of effort to do, but the fact is that it will be comprehensive work. So my suggestion is, you know, there's a point when you have to stop developing your application and focus on your write-up. And that's what I'm saying from now. If you want to get a good quality write-up, you should start working on some of these from now because it will take some time. It's not difficult, it's just time consuming. Then you test your non-functional requirements as well, right? Okay, so for the non-functional requirements, you of course will have the tests like NFR1, NFR 1.2, etc. The expected outcome, the actual outcome. So this is application security testing here. So for example, public user can and indicate what they can do, and then you check to ensure that the public user is able to do what they're supposed to do, etc. Right? Okay, and so you're testing each user group. Customers should be able to do this. Administrator should be able to do this, etc. Right? And you test each one. So that's the testing of the non-functional requirement. And then now, after you finish those, you go to your defects log. What is the defects log? The defects log is to record all defects, all program defects, whether it was partial or failure, right? So you should state the role of the defects log. And an example is given below. The defects log is used to record any errors or shortcomings or defects that were encountered while testing the application. It represents a list of actionable items for improvement. The only items entered in the log are those that failed the test conducted early on. State how the log will be used. So each item in the log will be issued a severity rating, which gives an indication of how important it is. Now remember, if you have a lot of items in your log, in your defects log, you may not be able to solve all of them. So how do you determine which one you should solve first? So the answer is you should give each one of them a priority rating. And this is what this is saying. So each one of them is given a severity rating, where 0 means it's not a problem at all. 1 is cosmetic problem, only need to fix if time allow. A rating of 2 is minor problem, fixing should be given low priority. And of course, if it's 3, it's a major priority, fixing has to be given highest priority. So this is an example of a defects log. It's a simple table. Notice here you have FR1.3, which failed. So you have the test, which is FR1.3. It includes the requirement, which is create an account. The problem was the strong password feature is not working. This has a severity level of 2, right? And a comment. Now the comment now is if you're able to fix it or not. So the comment here is this feature was addressed by including coding that checks to ensure the password consists of at least one uppercase, one lowercase, one digit, and a special character. So therefore this was fixed. So what we're saying is every item in your defects log, you'll put a severity rating and you'll indicate if it was resolved or not, right? So this is your defects log, which you will include as well. And then at the end now, you do an analysis of your test results. This is simply a summary of the overall testing, right? And here you will discuss how many tests were successful, how many fail. Of those that fail, how many were logged in the defects log, and how many of these that were in the defects log will resolve. So a conclusion to it would be something like, the test results were summarized, and from each of the tests carried out, 30 of the 35 tests were successful. There were 5 tests that were unsuccessful, and these were recorded in the defects log, which was used to record all defects. 3 of the 5 defects were corrected. The remaining 2 defects were not corrected because of insufficient time available. However, these defects were of low severity and therefore do not pose a threat to the application. Good, and that's an example of the conclusion. And that brings us to the end of our lecture. right? So that's the end of the testing chapter. And that's where you conclude with your defects log. So based on that, any questions or anything, guys, that you have?
No.
No problem. Well, what I'll do, I'm going to do a...
Have you record this? You record this session? I miss you on work now.
Yeah, that's okay, Lennox. I'm recording it. I have it recorded, and hopefully, because it's a short session, you should have it tonight itself, right? I'll email it in a bit. Good?
All right, thank you. I miss you whole session.
Convert, and then after convert, I have to upload it to YouTube. So anticipate maybe an hour and a half to complete the process with other things that I'm doing as well, right? So I'll send it. Guys, at the same time, I want to reiterate this. If you need any help, you need guidance. When you're going to write, you find reading through this is a bit much and you just want to bounce off some ideas, feel free to call, liaise with me, etc. Right? It's not a problem. I want to help. But the fact is that you need to develop a measure of discipline. You have more time than any other class in the history of this program to do this project. That may not be a good thing, because sometimes procrastination is your worst enemy sometimes, right? And at the end, you might leave things to last minute, etc., because you think you have the time, and at the end it becomes, you know, other things start propping up when you really need to work on it, when it becomes crucial. Pleading with you guys as well, start the work now. I am happy to sit down and discuss every piece before you start writing. First, to talk it through. Just, you know, I could call you back. Just call me and say, Ravi, just call me back and I will discuss it with you. We could talk about what you should include, etc. But you need to get started. You need to push yourself, pull yourself out of wherever you are and get that writing done, right? You know, the longer you take, the longer you will find that eventually you start feeling it becomes a mountain. Right now, you feel that, oh, I have the luxury of time, but this constant delay and procrastination, eventually you'll feel that, oh my God, it's too late, and your mind has changed and you're no longer going to do it. There are many students as well who don't submit this, and the technical report is not difficult, it's just time consuming, and I want to encourage you guys to start now. All right. Anyway, everyone, have a blessed night, and I'll be chatting with you guys again soon. Okay?
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you, Ravi.
Bye-bye.